Some secrets are written in scars that never fade. In the sterile halls of military training facilities, where young recruits learn to transform into soldiers, extraordinary stories often hide beneath ordinary uniforms. What happens when a decorated general seasoned by decades of warfare and leadership encounters something so unexpected that it stops him cold in his tracks? This is the story of Maria Santos, a quiet trainee, whose past held secrets that would shake the very foundations of everything her fellow soldiers thought they knew about courage, sacrifice, and the true meaning of service. Sometimes the most powerful warriors are the ones you least expect, and sometimes a single moment of recognition can change the course of not just one life, but many. In a world where assumptions rule and first impressions deceive, Maria's story reminds us that heroes don't always announce themselves with fanfare. Sometimes they clean rifles in silence, carrying the weight of unspoken battles and the strength of unbreakable spirits. This is her story, and it begins with a routine that was anything but routine. The morning sun cast long shadows across the concrete floors of Building 47, where the steady rhythm of military training echoed through every corridor. Maria Santos sat cross-legged on her bunk, her dark hair pulled back in regulation style, methodically disassembling her M4 rifle with the precision of a master craftsman. Around her, other trainees fumbled with their weapons, cursing under their breath as springs flew across the room and bolts refused to cooperate with inexperienced hands. Maria worked in silence, her movements fluid and deliberate. Each component was cleaned with meticulous care, inspected under the harsh fluorescent lights, and reassembled with an efficiency that came from muscle memory carved deep by countless repetitions. She had learned long ago that weapons were not just tools but lifelines, and treating them with anything less than absolute respect was a luxury she could never afford. Private First Class Thompson, bunked 3 beds down, watched her with growing irritation. He had been struggling with his rifle for the better part of an hour, and seeing Maria's effortless competence only amplified his frustration. Thompson was the kind of soldier who believed military prowess was measured in volume and bravado, and Maria's quiet confidence challenged everything he thought he understood about strength. "Show off," he muttered under his breath, loud enough for his buddies to hear but quiet enough to maintain plausible deniability. His friends snickered, feeding off the tension that had been building in their squad for weeks. They had all noticed how Maria seemed different from the other female recruits. She never complained about the grueling physical training, never sought help with equipment maintenance, and never participated in the late-night conversations that bonded most trainees together. Maria heard the comment but didn't react. She had learned to build walls around herself, invisible barriers that protected her from the casual cruelty that seemed to follow her wherever she went. These young soldiers saw only what they wanted to see, a quiet woman who kept to herself, someone they could easily dismiss or target for their frustrations. They had no idea that the person cleaning her rifle with such practiced ease had once crawled through enemy territory in conditions that would break most people's spirits. Sergeant Williams entered the barracks with his usual authoritative stride, clipboard in hand, ready to conduct the morning inspection. He was a career soldier in his early 40s, weathered by multiple deployments and hardened by the responsibility of shaping raw recruits into functional soldiers. Williams prided himself on being able to read people quickly, but Maria Santos remained an enigma that frustrated his usually accurate assessments. "Listen up, people," Williams barked, his voice cutting through the morning chatter. "General Morrison will be conducting surprise inspections today. I don't need to tell you what that means. Your weapons better be spotless, your uniforms better be perfect, and your attitudes better be professional. Anyone who embarrasses this unit will answer to me personally." The mention of General Morrison sent a ripple of nervous energy through the barracks. Morrison was a legend in military circles, a decorated veteran whose reputation for excellence was matched only by his intolerance for mediocrity. He had served in every major conflict of the past 2 decades, earning respect through both his tactical brilliance and his genuine concern for the soldiers under his command. Maria continued her methodical cleaning routine, seemingly unaffected by the announcement. Her rifle was already inspection-ready, had been for the past hour, but she continued her work with the same focused attention to detail. The repetitive motion of cleaning helped quiet the memories that threatened to surface at unexpected moments, memories of sand and heat and the weight of responsibility that had once rested entirely on her shoulders. Thompson, meanwhile, was becoming increasingly agitated. His rifle assembly was a disaster, with parts scattered across his bunk and his hands shaking from a combination of caffeine and anxiety. The prospect of facing General Morrison with a substandard weapon made his stomach churn, and his resentment toward Maria's apparent ease grew with each passing moment. "Hey, Santos," Thompson called out, his voice carrying an edge of desperation disguised as aggression. "Since you're such an expert, maybe you could help those of us who don't have whatever special training you think you have." The barracks fell quiet. Even the usual background noise of preparation seemed to pause as everyone waited to see how Maria would respond. She looked up slowly, her dark eyes meeting Thompson's with a calm steadiness that made him unconsciously step back. "I learned the same way everyone else does," she replied quietly. "Practice." "Right," Thompson scoffed. "Just practice. Nothing special about you at all." Maria didn't respond to the obvious sarcasm. Instead, she finished reassembling her rifle, the final click of the bolt sliding home, echoing in the sudden silence. She stood, checked her uniform one final time, and moved to her wall locker to retrieve her cleaning supplies. As she bent to put away her gear, the sleeve of her uniform shifted slightly, revealing just a glimpse of scarred skin along her forearm. The scars were old, healed but unmistakably deliberate in their pattern. Thompson caught sight of them and felt a strange chill run down his spine, though he couldn't articulate why. Something about those marks seemed different from the usual training injuries that all soldiers accumulated. Sergeant Williams noticed the sudden quiet in the barracks and moved closer to investigate. He found his trainees in various states of preparation, but his attention was drawn to Maria, who would return to organizing her personal equipment with the same methodical precision she brought to everything else. "Santos," Williams called out, "front and center." Maria approached without hesitation, her posture perfect, her expression neutral. Williams had called individual trainees forward before, usually to address deficiencies or provide additional instruction. The other recruits watched with a mixture of curiosity and relief that they weren't the ones being singled out. "Your weapon maintenance is consistently superior to your peers," Williams observed, his tone professionally neutral. "Where did you learn those techniques?" "Standard training, Sergeant," Maria replied. "I just take the time to do it properly." Williams studied her face, looking for something he couldn't quite define. There was a quality to Maria's attention that reminded him of seasoned soldiers, a hypervigilance that came from experiencing real danger. But according to her file, she was a standard recruit with no prior military experience. "Have you considered advanced weapons training?" Williams asked. "Your aptitude suggests you might benefit from specialized instruction." "I'm focused on completing basic training successfully, Sergeant," Maria answered. "Whatever assignments follow will be based on the needs of the service." Her response was textbook perfect, exactly what a good soldier should say. But Williams detected something beneath the words, a careful neutrality that spoke of practiced evasion. He made a mental note to review her file more carefully when he had the opportunity. The morning progressed with its usual intensity of preparation and anxiety. General Morrison's inspection was scheduled for 1100 hours, giving the trainees limited time to perfect their presentation. The barracks hummed with activity as soldiers polished boots, pressed uniforms, and desperately tried to achieve the level of perfection that might earn Morrison's approval. Maria used the time differently. While others frantically prepared their equipment, she sat quietly on her bunk, eyes closed, breathing deeply and steadily. To casual observers, she might have appeared to be resting or even sleeping. In reality, she was engaging in a meditation technique she had learned during the most challenging period of her life, a method of centering herself that had once meant the difference between life and death. The memories threatened to surface again, as they always did during moments of enforced waiting, images of desert compounds and night missions, of teammates who had trusted her with their lives and enemies who had underestimated the determination of a woman with everything to prove. She pushed the thoughts aside, focusing instead on the present moment and the task at hand. At 10:45 hours, word came that General Morrison was en route to Building 47. Sergeant Williams called the trainees to attention, arranging them in precise formation beside their bunks. The atmosphere was electric with nervous energy, and even the most confident soldiers felt the weight of impending judgment. Maria stood at attention, her rifle held in perfect position, her uniform immaculate despite hours of intensive preparation by others to achieve the same standard. She had learned long ago that excellence was not about dramatic gestures or obvious effort, but about consistent attention to detail and unwavering commitment to standards. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed in the corridor, steady and purposeful. General Morrison's reputation preceded him into every room he entered, and the trainees could feel the weight of his presence even before he appeared. These were the moments that separated true soldiers from those merely playing at being warriors. When the general finally entered the barracks, his presence seemed to fill the entire space. Morrison was a man in his late 50s, with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. His uniform bore the decorations of a lifetime spent in service, but it was his bearing rather than his ribbons that commanded immediate respect. He moved through the formation with practiced efficiency, examining equipment and evaluating soldiers with the expertise of someone who had seen every type of fighter the military could produce. He paused at several bunks, asking pointed questions about weapon maintenance and tactical knowledge. His inquiries were fair but demanding, designed to test not just technical competence, but also the ability to think clearly under pressure. Most trainees managed adequate responses, though their nervousness was obvious to everyone present. When Morrison reached Maria's position, he stopped for his standard inspection. Her rifle was presented flawlessly, every surface clean and properly maintained. Her uniform was regulation perfect, pressed and worn with the attention to detail that spoke of genuine pride rather than mere compliance. Outstanding weapon maintenance, soldier, Morrison observed, examining the rifle's action with the eye of someone who understood the difference between adequate and exceptional. Where did you develop these skills? Through careful attention to instruction and regular practice, General, Maria replied, her voice steady and professional. Morrison nodded approvingly and prepared to move on to the next trainee. As he turned, his eye caught something that made him pause. Maria's sleeve had shifted slightly during the inspection, revealing just a portion of the scarring on her forearm. What Morrison saw in that brief glimpse made him stop completely, his experienced eye recognizing something that others had missed. The general's expression changed subtly, his professional mask slipping just enough to reveal genuine surprise. He looked more closely at Maria's arm, then into her eyes, searching for confirmation of what his instincts were telling him. What he saw there was unmistakable to someone with his background and experience. The barracks remained at rigid attention, but everyone could sense that something significant was happening. General Morrison's inspection had taken an unexpected turn, and the tension in the room shifted from routine nervousness to something deeper and more complex. Maria met the general's gaze with calm steadiness, neither confirming nor denying what he might have observed. In that moment of recognition, two warriors acknowledged each other across the artificial boundaries of rank and circumstance. The quiet trainee who cleaned her rifle with unusual expertise had just revealed herself to be something far more significant than anyone in that room had imagined. General Morrison's pause stretched into what felt like an eternity, though in reality only seconds passed. The other trainees remained at attention, unaware of the silent communication taking place between their fellow soldier and one of the military's most respected leaders. Morrison's trained eye had caught details that others missed, patterns of scarring that spoke to experiences far beyond basic training. "Sergeant Williams," Morrison said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of absolute command. "I need to speak with Trainee Santos privately. Continue the inspection with the remaining personnel." Williams snapped to attention, recognizing the tone that indicated this was not a request but a directive. "Yes, General." Santos accompanied the general. Maria stepped forward without hesitation, her movements precise and controlled. As they walked toward the small office adjacent to the barracks, she maintained perfect military bearing, though her mind raced through possibilities of what Morrison might have observed and what questions might follow. The office was spartanly furnished with standard military efficiency. A metal desk, 2 chairs, filing cabinets, and walls decorated only with official notices and training schedules. Morrison closed the door behind them and gestured for Maria to take a seat, though he remained standing, his posture suggesting this was not a casual conversation. "At ease, soldier," Morrison said, though his tone indicated this was far from a relaxed moment. "I want you to understand that what we discuss here remains confidential unless you choose otherwise." Maria nodded, her expression carefully neutral. She had learned long ago that the most dangerous conversations often began with assurances of confidentiality. Morrison moved to stand behind the desk, his hands clasped behind his back in a posture that suggested deep contemplation. "Those scars on your arm," he began directly. "They're not from training accidents or civilian mishaps. I've seen similar markings before, and they tell a very specific story." The silence stretched between them as Maria considered her response. She had spent months carefully constructing a background that would allow her to serve again without the complications that came with recognition. Her past was supposed to remain buried, protected by classifications and bureaucratic barriers that even senior officers couldn't easily penetrate. "I'm not sure what you're referring to, General," she replied carefully. "I've had various injuries over the years, like most people." Morrison's expression remained serious, but there was no hostility in his demeanor. If anything, he seemed to be approaching the conversation with the respect due to a fellow professional. "Trainee Santos, those marks are consistent with injuries sustained during advanced combat operations. More specifically, they appear to be the result of close-quarters combat in desert environments." Maria's carefully constructed walls began to feel less secure. Morrison wasn't fishing for information. He was demonstrating knowledge that suggested he already knew more than he was revealing. The question became not whether to maintain her cover, but how much truth she was prepared to acknowledge. "With respect, General, my service record shows no prior military experience," she said. Though even as she spoke the words, she knew they sounded hollow to someone with Morrison's expertise. Morrison walked around the desk and sat down across from her, his demeanor shifting from formal inquiry to something approaching peer conversation. "Your official record is remarkably clean," he agreed. "Clean enough to suggest professional editing rather than genuine inexperience." The statement hung in the air like a challenge. Maria realized that Morrison wasn't trying to expose her for disciplinary reasons. He was trying to understand why someone with obvious advanced training was concealing their background. His approach suggested genuine curiosity rather than suspicion. "Sometimes people need fresh starts," Maria said quietly, offering the first glimpse of truth she had shared with anyone since beginning her new identity. "Sometimes circumstances require new beginnings." Morrison nodded slowly, recognizing the weight behind her words. In his decades of service, he had encountered many situations where good soldiers found themselves needing to rebuild their careers for reasons that had nothing to do with their competence or dedication. "I served in Afghanistan and Iraq," Morrison said, sharing his own background as a way of establishing common ground. "I've worked with special operations units, including some that officially don't exist. In that capacity, I've learned to recognize certain indicators." Maria felt a chill of recognition. If Morrison had worked with units that officially don't exist, then he might well have encountered references to operations she had participated in. The world of special operations was small and interconnected, and reputations traveled through unofficial channels that bypassed normal record-keeping. "I've also learned," Morrison continued, "that sometimes our best people end up in situations where their service can't be officially acknowledged. Sometimes they're forced to start over not because they failed, but because they've succeeded too well in operations that the world isn't ready to recognize."
The words struck Maria with unexpected force.
For months she had lived with the isolation of being unable to acknowledge the most significant experiences of her life. Morrison's understanding offered a glimpse of what it might feel like to be seen and recognized by someone who understood the true nature of her sacrifice. "If you're correct in your assumptions," Maria said carefully, "what would that mean for my current status?" Morrison leaned back in his chair. "Considering the implications of what they were discussing, that would depend entirely on what you want it to mean. Your performance here has been exemplary. Your technical skills are far beyond your peers, and your discipline is exactly what we need in leaders." "I'm not looking for special treatment," Maria said quickly. "I chose this path because I wanted to serve in a normal capacity, without the complications that come with previous experiences." "I understand that," Morrison replied. "But I also understand that sometimes hiding exceptional capabilities does a disservice both to the individual and to the institution. The military needs experienced leaders, especially those who understand the realities of modern warfare." Maria found herself facing a decision she had hoped to avoid. When she had chosen to restart her military career under a new identity, she had assumed she could serve effectively while keeping her past buried. Morrison's recognition threatened that plan, but it also offered possibilities she hadn't considered. "What are you suggesting, General?" she asked. Morrison stood and moved to the window, looking out at the training grounds where young soldiers were learning the basics of military life. "I'm suggesting that we might have been wasting your talents by treating you as a standard recruit. If you're willing to acknowledge your background, we could discuss assignments that would make better use of your experience." "And if I choose to maintain my current status?" Maria asked. "Then I respect that decision," Morrison replied without hesitation. "Your secret remains safe, and you continue through training as planned. No pressure, no consequences. You've earned the right to choose your own path." The offer was more generous than Maria had expected. In her previous experience with military bureaucracy, knowledge like Morrison's usually led to complications and forced revelations. His willingness to respect her choice suggested a level of integrity that was both surprising and reassuring. "May I ask how you recognize the scarring?" Maria inquired, curious about what had given her away despite her careful precautions. Morrison returned to his seat, a slight smile crossing his features. 20 years ago, I was involved in an operation in Somalia. Our unit was pinned down by hostile fire, and extraction seemed impossible. A Navy SEAL team was sent in to get us out." Maria felt her breath catch, though she maintained her composed exterior. Somalia had been one of her earliest operations, a mission that had established her reputation within the special operations community. One of the SEALs was a woman, Morrison continued, which was unusual enough to be memorable. During the extraction, she took shrapnel to her forearm while providing cover fire for our evacuation. The pattern of scarring I just saw is identical to what I remember from that night. The moment of recognition was complete. Maria realized that Morrison wasn't guessing about her background. He had personal knowledge of her service from one of her most dangerous missions. The careful cover she had constructed was meaningless in the face of direct experience. That operation was classified, Maria said quietly, neither confirming nor denying her involvement. But sometimes classification becomes an excuse for forgetting the people who made success possible. I never forgot that mission, and I never forgot the soldier who made our survival possible. Maria sat in silence for a long moment, processing the implications of Morrison's recognition. Her carefully planned new beginning was unraveling, but perhaps not in the way she had feared. Instead of exposure and complication, she was being offered something she hadn't dared hope for: understanding and respect from someone who truly comprehended the nature of her sacrifice. "The other soldiers don't know," she said finally. "They see me as just another trainee who keeps to herself." "And they're not wrong," Morrison replied. "Right now, you are just another trainee. The question is whether that's what you want to remain, or whether you're ready to consider alternatives." The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. Sergeant Williams entered after Morrison's acknowledgement, his expression indicating he had something important to report. "General, there's been an incident in the barracks," Williams said, his tone carefully neutral. "Some of the trainees were discussing Santos's performance during the inspection, and the situation became heated." Morrison and Maria exchanged glances, both understanding that her unusual competence had attracted attention that could become problematic. In the tightly controlled environment of basic training, anything that set a soldier apart could become a source of tension and conflict. "What kind of incident?" Morrison asked. "Thompson and several others were speculating about Santos's background," Williams explained. "The conversation became confrontational when some trainees suggested she was receiving special treatment or had advantages others didn't have. Throughout her career, she had dealt with accusations that her success was due to favoritism rather than competence. The assumption that exceptional performance by a woman must have some explanation other than skill and dedication was a prejudice she had encountered repeatedly. "How did the situation resolve?" Morrison inquired. "It didn't, completely," Williams admitted. "The trainees are back to their duties, but there's underlying tension that could resurface. Santos's abilities have been noticed by everyone, and some are beginning to ask questions about her background." Morrison nodded, understanding the delicate nature of the situation. Military units functioned on trust and cohesion, and anything that created suspicion or resentment could undermine the effectiveness of the entire group. "Thank you, Sergeant," Morrison said. "Continue with standard training procedures. Santos and I will conclude our discussion shortly." After Williams left, Morrison turned back to Maria with an expression that suggested the conversation had taken on new urgency. "It seems your choice may be more complicated than either of us anticipated," he said. "Your fellow trainees are already questioning your background. Maintaining your cover story may become increasingly difficult." Maria realized that her carefully planned integration into normal military life was facing challenges she hadn't anticipated. Her competence was betraying her, making it impossible to blend in as she had hoped. The skills that made her valuable also made her conspicuous. "What do you recommend?" she asked, acknowledging for the first time that she might need guidance in navigating this unexpected situation. Morrison considered the question carefully before responding. "I think it's time for you to decide what kind of soldier you want to be going forward. We can work together to find a path that honors both your desire for a fresh start and the reality of your capabilities." As their conversation continued, both Morrison and Maria understood that they had reached a turning point that would determine not just her immediate future, but the direction of her entire military career. The weight of decision pressed heavily on Maria's shoulders as she sat across from General Morrison, the afternoon light filtering through the office window, casting long shadows that seemed to mirror the complexity of her situation. The careful balance she had maintained for months was crumbling, and she found herself at a crossroads that would define not just her military future, but her entire identity going forward. "I need to tell you the full story," Maria said finally, her voice carrying the weight of years of enforced silence. "But I need your word that this conversation remains between us until I decide how to proceed." Morrison nodded solemnly, recognizing the significance of what she was offering. "You have my complete assurance. This discussion is entirely off the record." Maria took a deep breath, preparing to share details she had never spoken aloud to anyone outside the classified world of special operations. "You're right about Somalia, but that was just one mission among many. I served with SEAL Team 6 for 8 years, participating in operations across 3 continents. The revelation confirmed what Morrison had suspected, but hearing it stated directly still carried impact. SEAL Team 6 represented the absolute pinnacle of special operations capability, and their missions were among the most sensitive and dangerous in the military spectrum. My last operation was in Syria, Maria continued, her voice steady despite the emotional weight of the memories. We were tasked with rescuing a group of humanitarian workers who had been captured by a terrorist cell. The intelligence was compromised, and what should have been a simple extraction turned into a running firefight through urban terrain. Morrison listened intently, understanding that she was sharing details that few people would ever be authorized to hear. The level of trust she was demonstrating spoke to her recognition that their conversation had moved far beyond routine military interaction. 3 of my teammates were killed in the initial engagement, Maria said, her composure wavering slightly for the first time. The mission became about survival and getting the hostages out alive. We spent 72 hours moving through hostile territory, fighting running battles with enemy forces who knew the terrain better than we did. The office seemed to shrink around them as Morrison absorbed the magnitude of what she was describing. 72 hours of continuous combat operations represented a level of stress and endurance that few soldiers could comprehend, much less survive. We completed the mission, Maria continued. All hostages were recovered alive, and my surviving teammates and I made it to the extraction point. But the cost was enormous, and the psychological impact was something I wasn't prepared to handle. Morrison had seen enough combat veterans to recognize the signs of deep trauma, carefully managed but never fully resolved. Maria's controlled demeanor and hypervigilance suddenly made perfect sense as adaptive mechanisms developed under extreme stress. After that mission, I was offered medical retirement and full benefits, she explained. The military wanted to take care of me, to acknowledge my service and sacrifice, but I wasn't ready to stop being a soldier. The problem was that my psychological evaluations made it clear I needed time away from special operations. The picture was becoming clearer for Morrison. Maria had found herself caught between a military career she wasn't ready to abandon and trauma that made her current role untenable. Her solution had been radical but understandable: complete reinvention. I spent 2 years in civilian therapy working through the PTSD and survivor guilt, Maria said. During that time, I realized that I still wanted to serve, but I needed to do it differently. I wanted to be a soldier again, not a special operations weapon. Morrison understood the distinction she was making. Special operations soldiers existed at the extreme edge of military capability, functioning under pressures and conditions that took an enormous toll even on the strongest individuals. Maria's desire to serve in a more traditional capacity represented not a step backward, but a conscious choice to preserve her long-term well-being. Creating a new identity was the only way to start fresh, she continued. I had help from people within the system who understood my situation. My records were sealed, and I was given the opportunity to begin again as a standard recruit. And you chose basic training because you wanted to experience normal military life? Morrison concluded. Exactly, Maria confirmed. I wanted to remember what it felt like to be part of a regular unit, to focus on fundamental skills without the weight of life and death missions. I thought I could blend in and serve effectively without anyone knowing about my background. Morrison leaned back in his chair, processing the full scope of what Maria had shared. Her story represented both a personal journey of recovery and a unique situation that required careful handling to protect both her interests and those of the military. Your plan was working until today, he observed. Until you recognized the scarring, Maria agreed. I knew there was always a risk that someone with your background might piece things together, but I thought the odds were acceptable. A knock on the door interrupted their conversation again. This time, it was a junior officer who entered after receiving permission, his expression indicating he carried urgent information. General Morrison, the lieutenant said, there's a situation developing that requires your attention. Intelligence reports indicate possible terrorist activity targeting military installations in this region. All training facilities have been placed on elevated alert status. Morrison's expression shifted immediately from contemplative to operational. Years of command experience had taught him to transition instantly from administrative concerns to tactical priorities. What's the nature of the threat? He asked. Intercepted communications suggest a coordinated attack plan targeting basic training facilities, the lieutenant replied. The theory is that terrorists believe these installations will be less defended than operational bases. Maria felt a familiar surge of adrenaline as her mind automatically began processing threat assessment and response options. Despite months of trying to suppress her special operations instincts, The training and experience were too deeply ingrained to ignore. Morrison noticed her reaction and recognized the immediate shift in her demeanor. The quiet trainee had been replaced by someone evaluating tactical situations with professional competence. "What's the current security posture?" Morrison asked. "Standard protocols have been implemented," the lieutenant answered. "Additional guards have been posted, and all training activities have been suspended. However, our defensive capabilities are limited since this is primarily a training facility." Morrison stood, his mind already working through the implications of defending a facility filled with inexperienced recruits against a potentially sophisticated attack. Basic training installations were designed for education, not combat, and their defensive preparations reflected that focus. "Sir," Maria said quietly, "if I may make a suggestion." Morrison looked at her, seeing not the trainee who had been sitting across from him, but the experienced special operations soldier who had just revealed herself. "Go ahead. The most likely attack vectors would be the main gate and the vehicle maintenance area," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had both planned and defended against similar operations. "If the threat assessment is accurate, they'll try to create maximum confusion with multiple entry points." The lieutenant looked confused by Maria's tactical analysis, wondering why a basic trainee was offering strategic advice. Morrison, however, was listening with the attention due to an expert opinion. "What would you recommend?" Morrison asked. Maria's mind was operating at full capacity now, drawing on years of experience in both offensive and defensive operations. "Create a layered defense with the most experienced personnel at the outer perimeter. Move the trainees to the most defensible positions, and establish clear evacuation routes. Most importantly, identify personnel with advanced combat training who can serve as force multipliers." Morrison realized that the conversation had taken an unexpected turn. The threat to the facility had transformed their discussion from Maria's personal situation to an immediate tactical problem, where her expertise was not just valuable but potentially essential. "Lieutenant," Morrison said, "I want you to implement enhanced security measures immediately. Coordinate with Sergeant Williams to move all trainees to the Central Barracks complex." After the lieutenant left, Morrison turned back to Maria with an expression that mixed professional assessment with personal understanding. "It seems fate has decided to accelerate our timeline," he said. "Your background is going to become relevant whether we plan for it or not." Maria understood the implication. If the facility faced a genuine threat, her special operations experience would be needed regardless of her desire to maintain a low profile. The skills she had been trying to suppress might be the difference between life and death for her fellow soldiers. "What are you asking of me?" she said. "I'm asking you to help me defend this installation and protect these soldiers," Morrison replied. "Your tactical expertise could be crucial if the threat materializes." Maria felt the weight of decision settling on her once again. Months of careful planning and identity construction were being swept away by circumstances beyond her control, but she also felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the possibility that her past experiences could serve a positive purpose. "If I help you," she said, "my cover story ends permanently. The other soldiers will know I'm not who I've been pretending to be." "That's true," Morrison acknowledged. "But they'll also know that you're someone willing to put their safety ahead of your personal comfort. Leadership isn't about maintaining comfortable deceptions. It's about making hard choices when others are counting on you." The sound of vehicles moving outside the window drew their attention. Security personnel were implementing the enhanced defensive measures, and the atmosphere of routine training was rapidly being replaced by the tension of potential combat. "I need to know now," Morrison said. "Are you willing to step back into a leadership role to help protect this facility?"
Maria looked out the window at the young soldiers who were being moved to defensive positions.
She saw Thompson and the others who had questioned her abilities, now looking confused and frightened by the sudden change in their routine. These were soldiers she had served alongside for months, people who had become part of her daily life even if they didn't truly know her. The decision crystallized with startling clarity. Her desire for a normal military life had been an attempt to escape the weight of responsibility that came with her capabilities. But responsibility wasn't something that could be permanently abandoned. It was a burden that followed competent people wherever they went.
"Yes,"
she said firmly. "I'll help you defend this facility." Morrison nodded, recognizing the significance of her commitment. "Then, let's get to work. We have soldiers to protect and a facility to defend." As they prepared to leave the office, Maria felt a strange sense of relief. For months, she had been living as half of herself, suppressing the skills and experience that defined her as a soldier. Now, faced with a genuine threat to people she cared about, she was finally able to integrate all aspects of her identity into a coherent whole. The quiet trainee who cleaned her rifle with unusual precision was about to reveal herself as one of the military's most experienced special operations veterans. Her fellow soldiers were about to learn that the person they had dismissed and questioned was someone who had spent years in the most dangerous corners of the world, protecting others at enormous personal cost. But most importantly, Maria was about to rediscover that her past experiences weren't a burden to be hidden, but a capability to be used in service of others. The scars that General Morrison had recognized weren't just marks of old wounds, they were evidence of a warrior's dedication to protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. The transformation from hidden veteran to acknowledged leader was about to begin, and both Maria and her fellow soldiers would discover what it truly meant to serve under the guidance of someone who had earned her expertise through the ultimate test of combat.